Ready-made maths YouTube training videos. Teacher and teaching assistant mathematics training. This week is mastery in place value. What we're going to be looking at over the course of the whole week is a wide range of models, images, and visual apparatus that will help us to see how place value can really be viewed. One of the key elements of place value is that children can really understand it through a picture. And that's what we're mainly going to be looking at over the course of this week. We're going to be looking at visuals and images and pictures that will help people really see place value so that children can talk about it, can visualize it, and can really understand it rather than just seeing place value as 3 and 4 digit numbers that are separated into thousands, hundreds, tens, and ones. They need to understand what those numbers are and what they actually mean. And that's what today's and this week's material is all about. Mastery in place value. Day 1, we are looking at real place value. Today's lesson is going to take place almost entirely in the ready-made mathematics classroom. Over the past couple of weeks, we've been moving between the classroom and the PowerPoint presentations, but today is very much a visual-based mathematics lesson where I'd love you to see how the visuals, the base 10, can really be used to support the children's understanding of the place value. So with that in mind, let's go.
Good morning and welcome to week 4 of the Ready Made Maths YouTube channel mathematics training videos. You're joining me here in the Ready Made Maths classroom, and what you can see, I'm going to show you in a second on the table, is not the usual set of apparatus that I've been using over the last few weeks. We've got one specific type of apparatus we're going to focus on today, and that will develop us into a whole section of work this week on one particular area of mathematics that I think is incredibly crucial. In fact, probably if you were to look at all of the different elements and all the different aspects of mathematics and try to pinpoint which is the most important element in the whole of the mathematics curriculum, I'd imagine that most people would think of place value as the starting point. And that's where we're starting today. It's the first block in pretty much every single year group scheme of learning. It's the first thing that children start with. What is a number? What does a number look like? How can I visualize a number? What does a number mean when I see a 2-digit or a 3-digit or a 4-digit number? Is it just a string of numerals all put together, string of digits put together into a numeral, or does it have a real solid meaning? And that's what I hope we're going to look at over the course of this week. You'll probably have realised from the previous sessions that we ran, even on the mental arithmetic, that even when we're studying mental mathematics, there's a picture that comes first. When we're studying place value, that is even more crucial. We can't really teach place value just with numbers on a board. Place value is about having a real picture of the numbers in our heads and thinking, 32, what does 32 look like? What does 32 mean? How close is 32 to 30? How close is it to 40? How close is it to 100? Etc. Whatever number we look at, there's always a picture behind it. And that's going to be the major focus of all the work we're doing this week. Just a few little headlines then before we move into the content of today. First of all, real place value. What do we mean by real place value? Well, the real value of every number. That's what we're going to look at shortly. Secondly, this is what we're going to be doing all week, visualizing numbers. We're going to visualize them through that CPA approach of concrete pictorial before moving into abstract. We'll do that through a range of images and resources. We've looked quite a lot at egg boxes and tens frames in the early years work last week. But we're going to come back to those because obviously if you didn't watch the early years videos, we're going to have a little look at tens frames and how they can be used in Key Stage 1 and in Key Stage 2. We're also going to look at resources such as the abacus, which is an incredibly powerful resource, base 10 and place value counters. So many other resources that are going to support the teaching of place value. Thirdly, place value as 5 and a bit. Mentioned that a lot in the mental arithmetic sessions at the start. How does 5 and a bit really help our place value? Fourthly, ones, tens and hundreds. That's a big part of today. We're not going to have anything specifically on that. We're going to talk about that as we move throughout the session. Seeing numbers in ones, tens and hundreds and beyond. And finally, partitioning in different ways. That'll probably come up towards the end of the week as a greater depth, more detailed investigation. Moving on then, looking at the numbers on the Ready Made Maths number board. We're going to take a look at those shortly. But as we look at those numbers, and we look at the ones on the number board down here, and we look at the numbers that are surrounding the board, there's quite a connection between all those. They're all just kind of pure numerals. They don't really tell you a lot about the numbers. We can see there's a lot of numbers there that are written. We can see the 2 and 3 digit numbers that are kind of put together on this board. There are some images at the side which we are going to look at in future sessions, but generally it's the numbers that stand out. And then there's the arrow cards. Now the arrow cards were one of the National Numeracy Strategy's key resources for teaching mathematics. There's a lot of time that went into letting children realise that when you're seeing a number like 623, you're not just looking at a 6, a 2 and a 3, that the 6 obviously has a value of 600, the 2 has a value of 20, and the 3 has a value of 3. But that doesn't tell us enough, I don't think. And again, the National Numeracy Strategy did a lot of work on that, on the 600, the 20 and the 3, and encouraging children to read bigger and bigger numbers. But there needs to be a little bit more than just being able to read a number and saying what it's called. Obviously that 3 has a value, it's worth 3 ones. That 20 has a value, it's not just worth 20 or 2 tens, it's got more to it than that. And the 600 has got a value of 600s, but what else does it have a value of? And again, that's what we're going to be looking at in the course of these sessions. And as the numbers get bigger, there's more and more we could do to talk about them. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to look at certain numbers on that board and just answer a very simple question. Looking at the number 82, looking at the number 764, and looking at the number 2367. I'm going to pause the video in a second, have a look at those numbers and just have a quick discussion or write down how many tens are there in each of those numbers. I would imagine, starting with the smallest number, we look at that and say, how many tens in 82? 8. That's correct. There are 8 tens in 82. 8 tens and 2 ones give us the number 82. It's when we move to the other numbers that, again, not all the time, but generally in the UK, if I ask most children that question, how many tens are there in 764? If I was to go into year 3, say, how many tens are there in 764? I would say the vast majority of children, and many, many adults as well, would say, oh, 6. Why? Well, because there's 700s, 6 tens, and 4 ones. That was how I was taught at school. That was how the numbers were developed at school. Here's my hundreds, here's my tens, here's my ones. A little bit like my place value arrow cards, 623, 600s, 2 tens or 20, and 3 ones. But actually, is there more to it than that? How many tens are there really in 764? Well, there's 6 tens there, but what about here? How many tens in 100? There's 10 tens in 100. Well, that must mean there's 20 tens in 200. There must be 30 tens in 300. Therefore, there must be 70 tens in 700. So in the number 764, actually, we haven't got 6 tens, we've got 76 tens. We've got 70 tens there and 6 tens there. Finally, moving over to 2367, how many tens in that number? Well, there's 6 tens, there's another 30 tens, and there's another 200 tens. Because there's actually 100 tens in 1,000, therefore there's 200 tens in 2,000. Now, I've just talked about that, I've shown you no visuals, no explanation, I've just told you. We can't do that with children. We can't start off with something up here and say, well, hey, 764, 76 tens. Why? Never seen 76 tens before, I've no idea about that. What about this one? 236 tens. Where did that come from? There's 2,000s, 300s and 6 tens, but where's 236 come from? That's what we're going to be exploring today. We're going to be dropping back to basics, and rather than starting with the numeral and building, then going backwards to a picture, what we are going to do is start with the picture and build up to the numeral. What we are going to do, just to start off this whole week on place value, is take a look at the number 136 and the number 247. We're actually going to visualise them, not in the way that's traditional, but we're actually going to start with the value of the number and build it up. So I'm going to take you over to the table now, and let's have a look at those numbers as an actual visual. So let's just have a quick look at what's on the table today. As we have a look individually at the different amounts, you can probably see a range of different images, all today created with base 10. I am starting this week a little bit, I'm probably starting around about year 3 this week. I will be tracking back later in the week and looking at how this begins further down in Key Stage 1. But as a kind of general year 3 activity, what you've got there is loads and loads of different hundreds, tens and ones. We'll start off by taking a look at these 3 groups over here. and just letting you see what you think of them, and then we'll move over to this section on the other side. So I'm going to pause the video again in a second, and all I want you to do is just to look at what you've got in this first set over here, what you've got in this second set over here, and what you've got in this third set. Basically, what can you tell me about those numbers? Can you work out the value of the numbers? Do you know what they are? How have they been set out differently? Just anything that you can notice, anything at all that you notice about the arrangement, the value, what those numbers might mean, just anything that you can pick up about them. So we'll pause the video now, have a look, write anything down that you think, and then we'll get back together and discuss. Let's begin then with this first extremely strange looking set of ones. I'd say it's quite unusual for that to be some sort of apparatus that's used like that in Key Stage 1 or lower Key Stage 2. Children do see ones, but they normally see them as 1 to 10 or 1 to 20. What have we got there? Well, we've got, as you can probably see, 3 piles of ones. What are those piles worth? Well, unfortunately, we can't really tell because they've been set out in a very unstructured way. We are going to move on to structure later on. But if we are just counting things very, very quickly and putting them into a big pile, I suppose as long as we know what that pile's worth to begin with, then we can count them, relatively easily if we know the value of one big pile. Well, what I've done is I've basically counted these and put them together into piles of 100. This is a pile of 100, another pile of 100, but the third one wasn't quite 100. In fact, it was around about half of 100, or just under a half of 100. There are 47 counters in that particular pile. So we've got 100, 200 and 47. Not well structured, not well set out, but just to show that is what 247 looks like. What you may well have done is actually this. And imagine that as your starting activity for a Year 3 lesson. Imagine starting with that and saying, right, what's that worth? That's what we're going to look at now. What is that worth? It's a big pile of counters. Ask children to estimate. What do you think? That's actually very difficult to estimate. There's no real substance or structure to it. It's just lots and lots of counters randomly put together on a table. It is worth 247, but wouldn't it be an interesting challenge to ask children, well, what do you think it's worth and how are you going to find out, rather than just counting them all in ones? Is there a better way of doing it? Well, let's move over to the next pile of numbers. Again, I've deliberately set these out in an unstructured way. I've just put the ones together in a pile, and I've put the tens together in a pile. But I would say this is a far easier number to see than the previous one. With a little bit of counting and a little bit of mathematical understanding, I think it wouldn't take too long to be able to work out the value of that number. So again, let's have a look what we've got. Well, we've got, actually, we do have 24 tens. We've got over there 7 ones. I could count them. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 very quickly. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, and another 4. So I could actually quite quickly put them together and say, look, 10 tens, 20 tens, 24 tens, and 7 ones, 247. A little bit easier than my 247 ones over here, but they were obviously randomly arranged at the start. Finally, this was actually, I suppose, fairly difficult to arrange randomly. This one's quite an easy number to see. We've got 200s, we've got 4 tens, and with a quick count, or a 2 and a 5, or a 3 and a 4, or just counting in ones, we can get the 7 ones. Now, obviously, what I would normally do is put them like that, so we can see the 7 straight away. But my experience of what generally happens in Year 3 is this: that children are asked to make the numbers. They make the number 200 with 200s. I'll just put these over here. They'll then make the 40 with 4 tens, and they generally make the ones like that. And it tends to be quite unstructured. It tends to be 200s, 4 tens, and 7 ones, 247. What's missing, however, is what came before. As we've done earlier on, we didn't start with 200, 40, and 7. We actually started with the ones. At the very least, wouldn't it be worth starting with 24 tens and 7 ones? But really, wouldn't it be worth starting with 247 ones? And I think if children were given the opportunity from the word go to see a number as ones, and that's all it is, that's what the number is actually worth. At its basic value, it's worth 247 ones. Very, very difficult to see, very difficult to read. Therefore, we'll put it into tens. 10 tens, 20 tens, 24 tens, and 7 ones. And then we'll exchange 10 tens for 100. We'll exchange 10 tens for another 100. And we've got 4 tens and 7 ones left. I think if children did that in their first few days of place value, then they'd really understand what a number actually is. And the number 247 actually is worth 24 tens, not 4. It's worth 247 ones, not 7. Now take a look at this number that I've set up on the other side of the table. I think you'll notice a complete difference, even though it still is one section that is nothing but ones, a second section that is nothing but tens and ones, and a third section that is the more traditional hundreds, tens and ones. I'd like you to take a look now, and again when I pause the video, have a look at the numbers now, compare them to the original ones that you saw, the 247, and just think, imagine if I'd taken lots of ones and set them out like this, and then developed the same activity. Why are these numbers so much easier to read? And that will develop it into some of the other work that we're going to be looking at later in this week. So we'll just pause the video for a second, just take a look basically at the ones and the tens and ones sections, and just have a discussion as to what you can see. So let's take a look at how we can see the same number but represented in a way that's much easier to see. We'll take a look now, the ones. What do we see now? We don't just see a mess like we saw before. We don't just see a random big pile of ones. What we see now are a specific arrangement. Hopefully you'll see straight away groups of 5, therefore groups of 10. What you're in effect looking at here are lots of little tens frames. We're going to talk about tens frames later in the week. We'll cover those in Key Stage 1. But we're looking at lots of tens frames. And again, we've arranged a tens frame, little mini tens frames into one larger 10 frame. So what we can see here are 10 lots of 10, 10 groups of 10. We can see 100. We can then see 3 more tens, which is 30, and we can see 6 ones. Using that idea of a simple little tens frame just means that a number can be read so much more effectively. Again, we encourage children to do that however they're setting things out, rather than just leaving things randomly unstructured. Then it's going to make the whole mathematics much easier. As we move over now to the middle section, again, what number is there? If it was like that, you'd have to count them unless you knew already. As we see it now, we can see 5 tens and another 5 tens. 10 tens, 100. We can prove it, that it is worth 100. We can see there 10 tens are 100 and 36. And again, we know it's 6 because we can see the 5 and the 1. That then brings us to the traditional 100, 3 tens and 6 ones. Again, imagine that was the first few days in year 3 of place value work. Starting from something in ones, moving to tens, and moving to hundreds, tens and ones. And now let's look back at 247. Not really very helpful. That's your starting point. How many there are, I have absolutely no idea. But what we can do is build it up in a certain way. I've invited Lydia back again this week to help me out with this activity. This is going to be something that will probably cause a lot of teachers' teeth to get on edge. We're going to create a bit of a mess. So if you've got a bit of OCD, this is not going to be something that you're going to find too enjoyable. But what I'm going to do now is take this box of ones and I'm going to do this. Wow. Every single one poured on a table. This is such a good activity at the start of the year in year 4. Possibly even in year 3, but certainly in year 4. Start of the year, more than this actually. I mean, this is actually a scaled down version. I will take as many ones as I can get my hands on. I'll take a section of the classroom and just pour the whole lot, a few thousand ones, and pour them all over the classroom floor. When the children walk in at the start of the lesson, I'll be saying to them, right, how many have I got there? Straight away, we're into a fantastic estimation activity. Absolutely no idea. Have they got any vague idea of what that could be worth? And then we can get into that reasoning about, well, what could we do to actually work out what the value of that ridiculously big number is. I'm also going to take some still photographs of this particular activity so I can use those and put them on the PowerPoint for later so you can see them, the kind of absolute unstructured pile that we've got to start off with, and then we'll see how that develops as the activity moves on. Okay, so we've now got all these ones in front of us. We need to convert them definitely into something easier to read. Lydia, how many do you think there are there altogether?
There's a lot.
There's a lot? What do you reckon?
1,600.
1,600. Okay, Lydia thinks 1,600.
Maybe 900?
No, I'm going to go for 1,400. We'll see at the end who's got the closest. So, how are we going to then do it? Lydia, what do you reckon? How can we make that easier to read?
Count it in tens?
Count it in tens. You mean put it into tens first? Is that what you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, put it into tens. I think that's a very good idea. So what we're going to do now, very hyper speed, is myself and Lydia are going to spend the next few minutes putting all of those ones into tens.
This is going to take.
So at super speed, myself and Lydia have basically put together all of those ones into groups of 10. Let's have a quick look and just see if again you can estimate. We're not going to give you that much time to look, but can you estimate what the total amount is as we pan across the table? We'll have a look at the different numbers, pan all the way across. So hopefully now you can just have a vague idea of what we might have all together. What we're going to do then is we're going to put all of those into tens. We're going to take them as tens now, and we'll see what we'll do with those. We're about halfway through changing all of our groups of 10 for individual tens. You can see a big pile of tens over here, deliberately left in a large pile, and the ones that we've still got left to do. You can see how much easier it's going to be with the tens than it is with all of those ones. Let's keep going, Lydia. Are we ready?
Yep.
And let's go. Let's look at where we are now. What we definitely know is that right at the end we've got 5 ones, so it's something and 5, and this is all of our tens. Again, as you're building that up in class, what you could do is you could keep the tens in groups of 10 to make it easier. Again, I've just put them in a big pile. So we're now looking at this number and going, wow, that's what we started with, plus those 5. And we've swapped every single group of 10 ones for a 10, and this is what we've got. Let myself and Lydia now put our tens into groups of 10. Let's see what happens then. Okay, so myself and Lydia have now taken all of those tens that were all over the place and we've put them together into a much neater structure. If we actually have a look at this, probably without us doing too much, you could actually work out the overall answer as to how many the overall number is. But what we're going to do is we're going to do something a little bit different just so we can see what that number really looks like. Lydia, what do you reckon we should do with all these tens?
Put them into hundreds?
Put them into hundreds. So what we're going to do now, just very briefly, if we look back up, is we are going to take those tens and we're going to exchange those tens for the hundreds that are on the shelves. Off we go. Myself and Lydia have now extremely speedily changed all of those tens into hundreds. So what we can now see is a group of hundreds. I'll just set them out a little bit easier so we can just maybe get an even closer view of what that number looks like. We can definitely see now we have 3 tens and 5 ones, so we've got 35 at the end of the number. What we need to do now is just do something else with the hundreds. What do you reckon, Lydia?
Change them into thousands!
Very jazzy. Well, she'll change them into thousands. We've got 1,000 already ready. Do you want to take those 10 hundreds, Lydia? 100, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, 800, 900, 1,000. We'll take those away. We shall put those there. Those next to each other. And after all that hard work, we've now ended up with the number 1,235. What you might often see in a year 4 place value lesson is this is the first thing you see. 1,000, 200s, 3 tens and 5 ones. What's ended up happening is we've missed out, the children often miss out on what the number really looks like. They miss out on that big stage at the front where we have all of those. And that actually is, apart from the 5, that is 1,235 ones. That's exactly what it looks like. It's poured out all over the table. We then had the tens and the ones. The children never see that. They never see 123 tens and 5 ones. From there, we move to this big pile over here. We've got all of the hundreds. The children often don't see the 1200s and 35 ones. They just see that very, very basic 1,000, 200, 3 tens and 5 ones. Therefore, I think the activity we've just done is such a great starting point for Year 4 children to really get to grips with what place value is all about. If it was a Year 3 lesson, just start with a load of ones, anything between 100 and 900, just pour a load of ones on the table, do exactly the same thing. Let's have those ones as a big, giant, random pile of ones. Let the children see that, take some photographs, put them into tens, take some photographs, exchange them for the actual tens, take some photographs, structure the tens together into hundreds, take some photographs, put the hundreds over the top of them, take some photographs, and then eventually exchange your hundreds for thousands. And eventually you'll have something like this. It's a brilliant way of really letting the children understand place value. Well, that's what the rest of this week's work is going to be about. I hope you've enjoyed today's session. We're going to move on from that in the following sessions into looking again at scaling it back down and looking at place value with 2-digit numbers in years 1 and 2. We're going to take that up into 3-digit numbers as well. And we're going to spend this week looking at how we can manipulate number so that place value is something that children become incredibly secure with. That brings us right back to the board just to conclude today's activities. Looking at these numbers, later in the week we'll be looking at 6.93 and 3.7 and possibly 53,861. But let's look at some of the numbers we've looked at today. Well, we've specifically looked at 247 and 136. For children in Year 3, we can now say, how many tens in that number? We now know it's 13 tens and 6 ones. It's 24 tens and 7 ones. How many hundreds? 2 hundreds, 100. How many ones? 136 and 247. Again, 82, pretty simple that one. It is 8 tens and 2 ones, but also 82 ones. 764, 76 tens and 4 ones. 700s and 64 ones, or 764 ones. Last but not least, we've just been looking at a thousands number. This one's a little bit bigger, but imagine we'd started that activity with 2,367 ones on the table. We'd have then exchanged all of the ones into tens. We'd have ended up with 236 tens and 7 ones. What I'm going to do now is, just very briefly, add a little place value column. We'll do this properly tomorrow. The ones, the tens, the hundreds, and the thousands. Now we can't see that very clearly, but if I was now reading that as a place value number, I can now see there are 2 thousands, 3 hundreds, 6 tens, and 7 ones. But that number started off as 2,367 ones. We exchanged them all, so we had 236 tens and the 7 ones. We exchanged all the tens for 23 hundreds, 6 tens and 7 ones, and we then exchanged the hundreds for 2 thousands, 3 hundreds, 6 tens and 7 ones. Tomorrow we're going to take that idea of the place value columns, set them out in a different way, have a little discussion on that, and then develop that into other activities.
Let's have a look then at what we've seen throughout today's training. We're kicking off here with that massive pile of ones. No real idea. We can have a vague estimation as to what it might be. Myself and Lydia we're quite close at 1,400 and 1,600. Obviously, it ended up being a little bit smaller than that. That's where we start off. We then move into putting them in groups of 10. Now, although that looks a lot neater, and you could, I suppose, count them in tens in order to get to the answer, we have set them out here, and we didn't mention at the time, in 10 tens. So there's 100 there, 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, 700, and then we're in 50s, 800, 900, 1,000, etc. So that could be done, and it does look a lot neater, but we've still got lots and lots of ones. But children are now seeing this number is a big group of ones. That's how it begins. It then gets exchanged into a much smaller group of tens. We still don't know how many tens, and again, like we've got with the first picture up here, the third picture is very, very loosely structured, just all put together into a pile. We don't know how many there are. We move on to picture 4. We've now put those tens into a group of 10. We could actually work out the number now. We can see now what the number is. We can see basically 10 lots of 100 there, 2 more hundreds there, and 30 there. But much easier, let's take that and set it out in actual hundreds. So those two pictures look quite similar, but now they actually appear. That's hundreds. So we can now see 12 hundreds, 3 tens and 5 ones. So in effect, what we're seeing here is 1,235 ones. Here we're seeing 1,235 ones. Here we're seeing 123 tens and 5 ones. And here again, we're seeing 123 tens and 5 ones in a much neater, more organized way. We're now seeing 12 hundreds, 3 tens and 5 ones. And as I showed on the video, I would now move those 200s a little bit so you can see they're separate from the thousands. And finally, we exchange those 10 hundreds for 1,000, and we end up with 1,235. As we mentioned in the classroom, how often is that the only picture we start with? We don't see this, we certainly don't see this, and we definitely don't see this. It's one of those activities that isn't done very often, but is such a powerful way to start your place value sessions at the start of the year. And thanks very much for watching today's lesson on place value. I hope you'll stay with me for the rest of the week as we look at Key Stage 1 place value, develop that into Lower Key Stage 2 and move forwards into Upper Key Stage 2. We're going to look at not every aspect, but many of the key aspects of how place value could be introduced to children at the start of the year as a basis for what they're then going to be doing for the rest of the year. Thanks very much, and I'll see you all tomorrow.